Well, hello, everybody. This is Matthew Cossolotto. I'm the host of What's Your Promise, also the creator of Make a Promise Day, which is coming up on May 4th. And I stress the date, May 4th, because that leads into my next line, May the 4th be with you. I always like to mention what I call Matthew's mantra. I've given it a name now. It's Matthew's mantra. It's 4 simple sentences that are easy to remember, but it really sums up what I think of as the power of making a promise. Make a promise, keep your word, change your life, transform the world. Those 4 kind of simple ideas, but very powerful. That really sums it all up. And I always like to say that a promise is like a goal on steroids. And today I just want to mention, if you're ever watching an old movie or even a current movie, keep your eyes peeled, your ears peeled for a promise, because it's very likely that in almost every movie there's some kind of a reference to a promise made. It's really interesting how that happens in the plots of our movies and our stories, and it can be in books, but also in movies. I just happened to be watching a movie, an old movie called Mildred Pierce. You may have heard of it. I think Joan Crawford was the actress. And there's a promise. If you watch that movie, there is a promise. The mother, Mildred Pierce, makes a promise to her daughter that basically you're going to have everything you want. You're going to have all nice things in your life. I promise. And she used those 2 magic words. So I'd like to have Gail Lynne Goodwin on the show, on What's Your Promise, because she has a promise to talk about, but she also has an inspiring life story and a program, a way to help inspire many, many people around the world with her website. It's called Inspire Me Today. And hopefully Gail will talk a little bit about the website and how that got started, and we'll have a kind of a informal conversation, but we always start out by talking a little bit about this promise. But just so you have a better idea, Inspire Me Today, I read up a little bit about this, has members in, I think it's like 120 countries around the world, and that's pretty impressive. And she does interviews and has stories, inspiring stories from a lot of really well-known people, famous people like Sir Richard Branson and Jack Canfield. I mentioned Jack because obviously he's a famous name, but he also has done the foreword to my forthcoming book about the power of making a promise. So I always like to mention Jack's name, but he's been involved with Gail on her Inspire Me Today website, and Marcy Shimoff, and so many others that people would recognize. So it's an inspirational website, with luminaries who tell stories about that are inspirational and uplifting, and that's really what this program is all about, the What's Your Promise program. So I am so delighted to welcome Gail Lynne Goodwin to the program. And Gail, I'm sure I didn't do you justice, but come on in here and answer the big question. The big question I always put to my guests: what's your promise? And you don't have to jump into it, but let's talk about your promise, Gail, and obviously say hello.
Matthew, first off, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be a guest on your show. There have been many promises in my life that have changed my life, and I think that you're on to something big here, because when we make a promise, it's more than saying, yeah, I'll do that. We put our word on the line, and we have to step up for it. And probably the biggest promise that I can remember making in recent years was a promise to my daughter, like Mildred in that movie. My daughter was born with one of those amazing angelic voices that from the time she was a little girl, she has had this incredible voice for singing. She started singing when she was probably about 2 years old. She was offered Les Mis, the part of young Cosette in Les Miserables on Broadway.
There's a promise.
7.
There's a promise in Les Mis. I just and it's amazing that you mentioned that. Yeah,
you're right. And I had promised her that when you're ready, I will move mountains to make your dream happen. And my daughter called and said, "Hey, Mom, I've graduated from college. I'm ready to move forward. You promised you'd help. Let's go." So I put inspiremetoday.com. I never did anything with it. This was back in 2004. So 2004 through 2007, I worked with my daughter. And interestingly enough, that promise that I made to her ended up taking us around the world. Basically a story where my daughter and I together decided to write a song. And we're not songwriters, neither are some ideas of this is the message we'd love to get out to the world. And then we kind of put it aside and said, okay, let's go find real songwriters, listen to some of their music, and maybe record an album with using someone else's music. In that process, one night after a discussion with my daughter, I was in California, she was in Tennessee. I had a dream. About 2 o'clock in the middle of the night, I woke up and had a dream saying Carly was actually singing a song to me in the middle of this dream, over and over and over, the same song. And it was a song I'd never heard before. And again, not being a musical composer, I put dots on a piece of paper of da-da-da-da, where the notes went up and down the whole way through, wrote down the lyrics, and in the morning I called her and said, honey, I've got a song for you. And she's like, Mom, remember, you're not a songwriter. You're not in the business. You do real estate. And I live in Nashville. I hang out with really cool songwriters. So thanks anyhow, but keep your day job. And I said, no. This wasn't something that I wrote. This was something that I heard you sing to me. You've got to hear it. And she just kept putting me off, and I finally said, jumped on an airplane, flew to Nashville, sat down in a room with her, sang the song to her, and also to a friend who was a #1 songwriter, brought Gerald into the room and said, what do you think of this? And then after about 10 minutes of tweaking and move this here and put this here and add this here, the song was finished. She went into the recording studio, sang the song, did the recording of it. We sent it out with the help of Alex Mendozian and Mark Victor Hansen. We sent it out as an audio postcard. And just trying, let's do it as an audio postcard. And you talk about fulfilling a promise. I was moving mountains, doing everything I could to help her. And little did I know it came right around to me, which is, another whole story, Matthew. But that song that we put out had over 500,000 downloads within the first month.
Amazing.
And it was a song called Baby Come Back Home. And it was basically a song about a woman singing to her soldier husband in Iraq, just saying, honey, I love you, I miss you. Baby, come back home. And so it was an impassioned plea from a wife missing her husband.
Right.
And from that, we started getting invitations to have Carly perform at bases throughout the United States. We spent the next 2 years entertaining groups at about 100 different bases. Took 3 trips to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and then spent a month in Iraq and the Persian Gulf. So it was.
Yeah, I read a little bit about that. That's amazing. Yeah.
Well, it was a promise that I made to her to help her, and I had no idea where it would end up. No idea at all where we'd go with it. And it all came from that. And you talk about making promises. At the first time we were down in Guantanamo Bay, a Marine came up to me. And this was during the time that the prison trial were going on at Guantanamo, if you remember how nasty that was in the court of public opinion, so to speak. And he said to me, I'm surprised you're even down here. I mean, everybody hates us. And America doesn't support us, and on and on and on. And I said, no, you're wrong. America loves you. Regardless of any of our political positions, we support our troops, period. And he said, no, you're wrong. And I said, no, I'll prove you're wrong. And he said, no, you won't. And I said, actually, I promise you I will. And I went back to Nashville, again, not knowing how I was going to do this. And it was the week of the Country Music Association's big festival with like 50,000 people in town. So I I went to the newspaper and got a scroll, the blank scrolls of paper that newspapers are printed on. So they're 2.5, 3 feet tall, and they're infinitely long. And I rolled out this scroll of paper on top of a bunch of tables put together and invited people, threw out a bunch of Sharpie markers and said, hey, come on over and write or draw whatever message of love and support you'd like to send to our troops. Well, Matthew, we had no idea the Pandora's box we opened, I guess you'd say. I mean, it was incredible to me where that took us. Within 4 days, those scrolls were longer than 7 miles.
Wow, that's amazing.
And that's where we kind of said, okay. And then it was one of those, I mean, I had every intention of sending this down to the Marine in Guantanamo Bay to fulfill that promise, which we sent part of it there, but the vast majority of it, when we were finished, we actually partnered with Southwest Airlines. They had Carly and I on an airplane flying 3 different terminals per day, where she would do concerts while I would man the tables, talk to the crowds, and have them sign the scrolls. Then we ended up going to Congress at the U.S. Capitol building and having Congress take a break and come out and sign these scrolls. And when the day Congress signed them, it broke 18 miles long. So it was
That's incredible.
pretty darn impressive of how long those scrolls got to be. And we ended up taking them to Iraq on a 29-day tour of Iraq in 6 countries in the Persian Gulf, where we literally wrapped them around the bases of 18 different military bases that we have to show our troops, the guys and gals behind, that support America. We wanted to literally wrap them with the love and support of a grateful nation, and we ended up doing that. And it all came from that promise to help my daughter.
Yeah, that's what's amazing. The promise just starts this whole chain of events in motion, and you don't know where it's going to lead. And this is part of the message in the book that I'm working on, The Power of Making a Promise. And some people will say, well, wait, it's more important to keep a promise than to make one. But I always say, well, you got to make it first, and that's where it gets started.
Oh, absolutely. And the making it sets the intention.
That's right. Sets the direction, sets the intention, puts you on a path.
The magic.
That's where the magic is.
There's something about that, Matthew, that opens to magic. And when I made those 2 promises, it was me not saying no to an idea or to a dream, even though I had no idea how we were going to make it happen. No idea whatsoever.
Yep. This is amazing.
If you had come to me and said, okay, I want you to create a letter that's 18 miles long, spend the next couple of years, and then end up spending a month in Iraq in a war-torn country, I would have said, Matthew, you're crazy. There's no way I can do that. I don't know how to do that. But just by stepping up and saying, yes, I'm going to keep this promise, A leads to B leads to C leads to D, and oddly enough, in my specific situation, as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, I had booked the name InspireMeToday.com in 2004, and then my daughter called, and I fulfilled that promise. And lo and behold, you'll love this, the serendipity. I think God must be laughing at times. But I was at the very first base in Iraq, a place called Al-Qaim, when a young boy came up to me. He was 19, and he asked for a huge favor. And I, of course, said, of course, what do you need? And he said, I'd like a mom hug, please. And, oh, God, my heart just opened, and I opened my arms, and I stepped forward. He puts his hands up and steps back a step and says, hang on a second. Before you say yes, you need to know I haven't had a shower in 37 days.
Oh, my God.
I said, I could care less. Come here. And as I'm holding this young man, and he's crying on my shoulder, and I'm crying on his, he told me it had been 9 months and 4 days since he'd been touched, which to me is like, rip my heart out right there,
Yeah.
And I asked him I asked him to explain to me why had it been 37 days since he'd been on base. He explained to me that he hadn't showered in 37 days because he had lived in a ditch 3 miles from there on the border of Syria and Iraq. And that was his job, was to guard that stretch alone for 30 to 40 days, and then he could come back to the base and then go back out again. And I'm thinking to myself, I would go crazy living in my house for 30 days without talking to anyone, no communication. And I explained this to him. His name was Jesse, and I said, Jesse, how do you do it? And interestingly enough, Matthew, he reaches back in his backpack, pulls out an MP3 player, looks at me and says, I'm always looking for good inspiration, ma'am. And I felt like, God was tapping me on the shoulder saying, hey, remember that website we talked about?
Yes.
And I came back, having spent those years with my daughter, I came back and said, honey, I love you, but you're at the point that you can take this now on your own. I've got to go follow this other thing that I was called to do. And that's when we founded InspireMeToday.com.
Amazing. Wow. And that's how it does work. It's the serendipity you mentioned, and it's you put the intention out there. Obviously, you registered the domain name, but you didn't know what you're going to do with it.
Else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had the intention of, interviewing people and having interviews up on that site so that, whether it's a housewife in Iowa, an entrepreneur in Florida, a developer in California, I don't care who they are, what walks of life. I wanted a place that people could come to and in just a few minutes say, yes, I remember who I am. I remember that I'm this magnificent being, that I have the power to do, to be, or to create anything in my life, and my life rocks. That's what I wanted Inspire Me Today to be. And each day we feature a different person from all walks of life, from the amazing rock stars like Sir Richard Branson or Seth Godin or Tony Hsieh of Zappos, the whole way down to 7-year-old Sammy Fitzgerald from Dallas, Texas, who teaches the art of gratitude in school.
Right.
So and everything in between. We've interviewed as young as 7, as old as 104. So it's an incredible bunch of people, and I'm honored to have been the facilitator. I call myself the ambassador, because I go out and gather the information and then bring all that inspiration back to share it with them.
I mentioned that you were inspirational, Gail, and you have proven me correct in my prediction.
Thank you.
What you're doing is so inspirational, and what you've said on this show really underscores all of the wonderful things that you bring to the world and the inspiration that you bring to people on your website and in your. I know you go out and you speak, and you have. I don't know if you have a book. Do you have a book?
It's coming out soon. I'll keep you posted on that.
Yeah, I was going to plug your book if you had a book, but
not quite yet. Right now, what I'd love for you to introduce to people is InspireMeToday.com. It is 100% free. Come to the site. You can sign up and have it either emailed to your mailbox each morning. You can come read it on the site. You can get it through RSS feed, or we also have an iPhone app. So all different ways for that inspiration to be delivered to you automatically, that you don't even have to think about it. You can just wake up and say, wow, I'm ready to be inspired. You're definitely on to something here. And I just commend you and thank you for doing the work that you're doing. It's an inspiration to me, and we'd love to have you back on Inspire Me Today as well.
Before you go, just if you want to take this promise challenge, is there any promise that you'd like to make publicly about any of the work you're doing or in your life, or any promise that you'd like to make public so that it helps to reinforce your commitment to doing it? So that's an opportunity I like to give to all of my guests. If there's a
Mine would be to reaffirm an ongoing promise that I actually have hanging here in my office. I'm looking at it. And that is I promise to never say no to an idea or to a dream just because I don't know how to make it happen.
Right. Excellent. That's beautiful.
I so strongly believe that when somebody hears something inside, like when I heard that song in that dream, it's kind of like, the universe or God or whatever you want to call it, whispering in your ear. Pay attention to those little voices. Pay attention to those nudges. They're there for a reason. Follow those, and you'll lead a life of bliss.
Well, but let me just wrap up by reminding people of that mantra, and then we'll sign off. Make a promise, keep your word, change your life, transform the world. Thanks for listening to What's Your Promise, and thanks to Gail Lynne Goodwin for being my guest. I really had a great time. Thanks a lot, Gail. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Matthew.